A small pink house sits in eerie silence on a warm June evening. The neighborhood is still until a phone screen suddenly flashes with a chilling message. "That bitch is dead!" Friends and neighbors gasp in confusion and terror. They rush to the house, pounding on the door, but no one answers. Through a cracked window, only darkness, only stillness. Something is very, very wrong. Sirens begin to wail in the distance, growing louder. Police cruisers screech to a halt. Flashlights cut through the dark as officers step inside. And then, a gruesome discovery. Blood, silence, and a question that hangs in the air like smoke. What happened in this house? And where is Gypsy? This is not a horror movie. It's a true story, one that shocked the world. This is the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, a case so bizarre, so tragic, it almost defies explanation. At first, the victim seemed obvious. Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, a 48-year-old devoted mother, found murdered in her own bedroom. By all appearances, she was a selfless caregiver. Neighbors described her as the nicest lady in the world. She had dedicated her life to her frail daughter and was admired for it. That daughter was Gypsy Rose Blanchard, age 23. Though many believed she was much younger. She seemed to suffer from every illness imaginable. Leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, the list went on. She was wheelchair-bound, fed by a tube, with a high-pitched, childlike voice. In Springfield, Missouri, Gypsy was a miracle child who beat the odds again and again, and always at her side was her mother, Dee Dee, the caring single mom, who would do anything for her sick little girl. Also in this twisted story is Nick Godejohn, a 26-year-old from Wisconsin, socially awkward, quiet, barely known to anyone in Gypsy's life. But Nick would soon become central to a crime no one could have predicted. As the police investigation began, the picture started to shift. Dee Dee was dead, Gypsy was missing, and Nick had vanished. Who would want to harm a devoted mother, and why? The answers would reveal something far darker, a story of lies, control, and a desperate bid for freedom. On June 14, 2015, the alarm was raised. Those ominous Facebook posts on the Blanchards' shared account, "That bitch is dead," sent a jolt of panic through the community. Friends, terrified, called 911. Unsure if the page had been hacked or if it was some kind of twisted prank. Neighbors gathered on the lawn, their faces tight with worry. Dee Dee's car was still in the driveway, and through the window, they saw something chilling. Gypsy's wheelchair, sitting idle by the couch. That alone was a red flag. Gypsy never went anywhere without that chair. Something was very, very wrong. One brave neighbor climbed through a window while the others waited for police. The house was dim, quiet, still. Nothing seemed obviously out of place, but the air felt heavy. Gypsy's medications and medical supplies all untouched. Whatever happened here, this wasn't a robbery or a quick escape. Then came the moment that confirmed everyone's fear. Deputies arrived, and after securing a warrant, they stepped inside. Minutes later, a deputy's voice crackled over the radio. "Victim located. Dee Dee Blanchard was found lying face down in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed to death days ago. But Gypsy? She was gone." The town was gripped with panic. A disabled girl, who relied on her mother for everything, was now missing. And the killer, still out there. An Amber Alert went out. The face of a pale, wheelchair-bound 19-year-old, plastered across every screen and bulletin. Friends feared the worst, that Gypsy had been abducted by her mother's murderer. Vigils were held, fundraisers launched. The town braced itself for another tragedy. But soon, detectives noticed something strange. No forced entry, no valuables missing, no signs of a struggle. This didn't look like a home invasion. It looked personal. Sheriff Jim Arnott made a cryptic statement. Things are not always as they appear. He was right. The truth hiding behind that locked door was darker than anyone imagined. The search for Gypsy and the hunt for Dee Dee's killer began immediately. Detectives zeroed in on those strange Facebook messages. Digital forensics traced the posts to an IP address in Wisconsin. This was an enormous break in the case. Gypsy could be halfway across the country. Soon a name surfaced. A close friend of Gypsy's told police that Gypsy had a secret online boyfriend named Nick Godijon. It was the first time many had heard that name, but now investigators had both a suspect and a location. On June 15, 2015, officers in Waukesha County, Wisconsin moved in on Nick Godijon's house. Inside, they found exactly who they hoped to see: Gypsy Rose, alive and unharmed. And to their astonishment, she was walking under her own power. With her was Nick Godijon. The pair surrendered without incident when the police raided the home. Gypsy was immediately taken into protective custody, and Nick was placed under arrest. Back in Missouri, news spread fast that Gypsy had been found. Relief swept through the community, until the next announcement hit like a thunderbolt. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was not a kidnap victim at all. She was a suspect in her mother's murder. As deputies brought Gypsy back to Springfield in handcuffs, the public struggled to understand. How could this frail, sickly girl have had any role in such a violent crime? And why was she suddenly walking as if she'd never needed a wheelchair? The interrogation room brought the answers. Faced with the evidence, both Gypsy and Nick began to talk. Within hours, the two had confessed their roles in Dee Dee's killing. For the seasoned detectives listening, it was almost beyond belief. The pair recounted a tale of deceit and suffering that turned the case upside down. Gypsy, long seen as an object of pity and protection, had helped plan her own mother's death. The investigators realized that this was not a simple case of a missing person or a home invasion. It was something far more complex and heartbreaking. The why of this crime, now coming to light, would leave everyone who heard it in shock. To unravel the mystery, police pieced together exactly what happened on the night of the murder. It was June 9th, 2015, a humid Tuesday in Springfield. That evening, Gypsy and Dee Dee were at home like any other night. Gypsy later recalled that they spent a pleasant evening together, watching a movie and even doing their nails. Gypsy then helped her mother into bed. But Gypsy had already set a deadly plan in motion. Late that night, after Dee Dee fell asleep, Gypsy quietly slipped away to the bathroom and texted her boyfriend. Nick Godijon was waiting nearby. He had traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri earlier that day. Gypsy left the front door unlocked for him. Sometime after 2 a.m., Nick entered the Blanchard house. Gypsy handed him a knife, gloves, and duct tape, tools they had agreed upon for the grim task. Then Gypsy retreated into the bathroom, covering her ears so she wouldn't hear what was about to happen. Nick walked into Dee Dee's bedroom, where the 48-year-old was fast asleep. In the darkness, he approached the bed. Then he began stacking Dee Dee repeatedly in her back with sharp knife as she jolted awake in horror. Nick would later admit he attacked her 17 times while Gypsy listened to her mother's screams from the next room. Gypsy was paralyzed with fear. "I wanted to help her so bad, but I was so afraid. My body wouldn't move, then everything just went quiet," she recalled of that moment. In a matter of minutes, the deed was done. Dee Dee Blanchard was dead. Gypsy emerged from the bathroom to a gruesome scene and burst into tears. Nick was oddly calm. They knew they had to flee immediately. The couple wiped down anything they might have touched. Before fleeing, they grabbed a pile of cash, around $4,000 that Dee Dee had stashed in the house, mostly funds from Gypsy's father's child support checks. Gypsy and Nick then slipped out into the night. For the next couple of days, Gypsy and Nick tried to lay low. They hid out in a local motel. In a move to cover their tracks, they even mailed the murder weapon, the bloody knife, to Nick's home in Wisconsin, rather than carry it with them. After that, they bought bus tickets and headed north to Nick's hometown. They arrived at Nick's family home in Wisconsin and tried to quietly settle in. But Gypsy, racked with guilt and afraid her mother's body might not be found, made a fateful decision. Using Nick's computer in Wisconsin, Gypsy posted the now infamous message on Facebook herself. She hoped someone would see it and discover Dee Dee's body. It worked, and it also led police straight to their door. The crime itself was brutal and shocking, but now all eyes turned to the courtroom and to the motive behind this act. What could possibly drive a daughter to orchestrate the murder of her own mother? The answers lay deep in Gypsy's past. The truth behind this crime is both heartbreaking and grotesque. Everyone thought Dee Dee was the victim of a brutal crime, but when she finally spoke, she told investigators something no one saw coming. Gypsy's confession wasn't what anyone expected. It rewrote the entire story. Her mother wasn't who she claimed to be. Her mother wasn't just the victim. She was the real monster in the house. It turned out that Gypsy's entire illness narrative was a lie crafted by her mother. Dee Dee Blanchard suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare mental disorder in which a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain sympathy and attention. In simple terms, Dee Dee made Gypsy sick on purpose for years and fooled everyone around them. From infancy, Gypsy was subjected to a terrifying charade of sickness. Dee Dee convinced doctors that Gypsy had countless ailments, from muscular dystrophy to leukemia to seizures, none of which Gypsy actually had. Dee Dee manipulated the medical system at every turn. She sometimes gave Gypsy medications to mimic symptoms, and she pushed for unnecessary surgeries on her daughter. Dee Dee even routinely shaved Gypsy's head so that she would look like a chemotherapy patient. She made her daughter use a wheelchair full-time by around age 8, even though Gypsy could walk just fine. For the outside world, Dee Dee presented herself as the ultimate devoted mother, and the world rewarded her. She and Gypsy received donations, trips, and even a house from charitable organizations eager to help the supposedly terminally ill child. They had a home built for them with a wheelchair ramp and a hot tub for Gypsy's therapy. They were invited on free vacations to Disney World. All the while, Gypsy was perfectly healthy, yet trapped in the role of a gravely ill, wheelchair-bound girl. Behind closed doors, the situation was even darker. Dee Dee kept Gypsy largely isolated from the outside world, kept at home under Dee Dee's constant supervision. She controlled every aspect of her daughter's life: her medications, her food, her interactions. Gypsy's father, Rod Blanchard, occasionally tried to visit or call, but Dee Dee pushed him away and told Gypsy he didn't want to see her, a complete lie. If Gypsy ever questioned her condition or resisted, Dee Dee would punish her, sometimes by hitting her or denying her food. Gypsy grew up in fear of her mother, believing that Dee Dee could even kill her if she disobeyed. As Gypsy entered her late teens, though she thought she was younger due to her mother's lies about her birth year, she began to realize that some of her disabilities were fake. She could stand and walk when her mother wasn't watching. She secretly accessed the internet after Dee Dee fell asleep, craving any connection to the outside world. That was when Gypsy met Nick Gaudijon around 2012. She was lonely, naive, and starved for love. Online, Gypsy didn't have to be sick or in a wheelchair. She and Nick struck up an intense online romance over the next 2 years. Nick had his own difficulties, but to Gypsy, he was a Prince Charming who offered the love and understanding she desperately craved. They developed a shared fantasy life and often discussed escaping to be together. When Dee Dee discovered that Gypsy was communicating with a man online, she was furious. In one incident, Dee Dee caught Gypsy messaging with Nick and smashed Gypsy's computer with a hammer. She threatened to break Gypsy's fingers if she ever tried to contact him again. The abuse was escalating and Gypsy felt more cornered than ever. By 2014, Gypsy was desperate. She had come to believe that the only way she would ever be free was if her mother was gone for good. She and Nick began to discuss a plan to kill Dee Dee. At first, it was just a dark fantasy born of years of frustration. But eventually, it solidified into reality. In their text messages, they chillingly referred to the planned murder as the last resort, if Gypsy couldn't find another way out. Nick was eager to prove his devotion to Gypsy by doing the act himself. And so, a perfect storm of mental illness and manipulation led to the night of June 9, 2015. Gypsy felt she had no other choice. Nick believed he was saving the girl he loved from a tyrant. In Gypsy's eyes, this was not a cold-blooded crime, but a final, desperate bid for freedom from her mother's tyranny. It was a horrific solution to an unimaginable situation. But to truly understand the why, one has to understand the lifetime of abuse that Gypsy endured. This murder was the catastrophic end of a long cycle of abuse. After the arrest, the legal system faced the unusual task of prosecuting a victim-turned-offender. Once the details of Dee Dee's abuse of Gypsy emerged, public opinion largely shifted in Gypsy's favor. Prosecutors acknowledged that Gypsy's case was extraordinary and decided not to pursue the harshest charge. In July 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in her mother's death and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In prison, Gypsy finally received proper nutrition and medical care. She even gained weight and looked healthier than ever, a stark contrast to the underweight, pale girl she had been before. Gypsy herself has said that she felt freer behind bars than she did living under her mother's control. Nicholas Godejohn's fate was decided in a separate trial. In November 2018, he went before a jury on a charge of first-degree murder. Nick was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Gypsy, she became eligible for parole after serving 85% of her sentence. In late 2023, after about 8.5 years behind bars, Gypsy Rose was released on parole. At 32 years old, she stepped out of prison a free woman. A very different person from the sickly, childlike figure the world once knew. In a 2023 interview given just before her release, Gypsy expressed deep remorse. "Nobody will ever hear me say I'm glad she's dead or that I'm proud of what I did. I regret it every single day." Though she finally gained her freedom, Gypsy knows that what she did was wrong and has said she wishes she had found another way out. Gypsy's life after prison is now just beginning. She has to learn how to live independently, something she was never allowed to do in her first 20 years. Her family is now helping her adjust to the outside world. Gypsy has even talked about sharing her story to raise awareness about Munchausen by proxy and to help other victims. She will forever carry the burden of her mother's murder, but she is determined to make the rest of her life mean something positive. The case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard is a chilling modern tragedy that shows how reality can be stranger and more twisted than any fiction. On the surface, it seemed a story of heroic devotion, a mother sacrificing everything for her sick child. In reality, it was a nightmare of abuse, lies, and control. Monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they wear the face of a caregiver. This story forces us to grapple with moral gray areas. Gypsy Rose was simultaneously a victim and a perpetrator. She endured unimaginable cruelty and reached a breaking point. Does that excuse her actions? Not legally, she did serve time for the crime, but it does make us understand how she was driven to such an extreme. It's a stark example of how prolonged abuse can warp a person's mind and push them beyond the brink. Sometimes the instinct to survive can lead to tragic outcomes. There are broader lessons here as well. The warning signs of Munchausen by proxy were present. One doctor had suspicions and some family members found Dee Dee's behavior odd, but no one intervened. This case urges us not to dismiss our instincts when something feels off, especially when a child's health and safety are at stake.